أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمخلوقين سيدنا ونبينا وشفينا أبي القاسم محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم أما بعد. Sisters and brothers, Assalamu alaikum. This is the second of our, my allocation of 5 sessions, inshallah. And as we said yesterday, we just introduced the subject to see that it is now important for us to understand where this relationship between Muslims and Europe starts from, where it has reached, and what, if any, lessons for future, our own future here, we can learn from the different aspects. I think although yesterday we saw that probably one of the critical change is that this relationship is not defined by conflict between Christianity and Islam. It is something else which we will come to. But it started as a conflict between Christianity and Islam. So today we want to see 2 particular episodes in the history of interaction between Muslims and Europe. And these will be the Crusades and, of course, the Reconquista and Inquisition in Andalusia. But before we come to that, we need to put forward an idea which has often been distorted by many people. People who want to portray Islam as primarily a religion of violence, they want to say that Muslims or Islam spread through the sword. This is quite a common kind of popular understanding of Islam. As we said yesterday, by the year 711, Muslims had reached Spain by crossing the Straits of Gibraltar, which is actually the proper name of that is Jebel al-Tariq. And on the other side, we had reached to the gates of China. Now, anybody with any sense would imagine that a group of Bedouins in 50, 60 years cannot take over a large part of the known world in that time, okay? By military conquest. So there are other factors which need to be looked at to explain this rapid expansion. Of course, even the Quran gives some hints, and for example, this ayah, Gulibatur Rum, Rome has fallen. Same way the Persian Empire fell. So these 2 empires, which were the big empires of that time, were decaying from internal issues. And so they collapsed. At the same time, Christianity was going through quite an existential crisis. Within Christianity, unlike today, there were a number of very interesting nuances. As we hinted yesterday, this sort of centered around the whole question of what is the status of Isa alayhi salam. So obviously we start with common factors like that it was conceived by Maryam without any human agency. So that is in Christianity is called the virgin birth. Then we come to the Son of God, which is like a Christian concept. And of course, we come to the crucifixion and saving of the world. But this is much later development in Christianity. Initially, there was quite a large number of Christian sympathizers who were nearly monotheistic, so who did not believe in Jesus as Son of God. They believed in other things, who believed in less of a Son of God than otherwise. So, and also the Persian and the Roman empires, people had become tired of oppression and suppression. So at some stage, they were ready to feel that, look, even these guys are Muslims or whatever, our life is better under them. We don't care. We can change. So these Christians who were aligned or inclined to monotheism, and these Persians and Romans who were tired of their rulers, were quite happy to submit to Muslim rule. And so it just spread rapidly. The resistance was token, and these people. The second thing which Muslims did, which is quite interesting, is that they did not insist on doing all the work themselves. As soon as somebody came or converted or aligned with them, especially from the Roman and Persian empires, who were much more advanced in all kinds of things, they started to use them and their knowledge to build more. So it was really a very sleek method of expansion by using people who were not Muslims before. Some of them were not Muslims even after that, but they used them to expand and do their job. So, for example, one of the things which they did quite early on was that they commissioned and they translated every relevant book from Greek and Roman heritage into Arabic. It's not like a king says, okay, translate this book because I like this book. Not token. Every book. So this knowledge, which was, of course, heritage of mankind, became part of the Muslim development, right? Even now, you see the influence of that is lingering on. I mean, if you look at Islamic philosophy and Islamic fiqh and so on, the influence of Plato and Socrates and things, Aristotle, is quite profound. Their philosophical reasoning and so on. In fact, sometimes we feel that it is limiting the expansion of some of these disciplines, but that's something for another debate. So this translation and this, then of course they started to build on this knowledge. So you had, for example, if you take a typical person like Abu Rayhan al-Biruni. Abu Rayhan al-Biruni, he traveled east rather than west. He went to India. He studied Sanskrit. He gathered quite a lot of the traditional Indian knowledge on astronomy, on numbers, and all those things, brought it back, and then developed what we call Arabic numerals. So the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which we are seeing are actually Arabic numerals, right? Before that, we used to use Roman numerals, and anybody who has tried to multiply, try to go home and multiply 1,000 by 1,000 in Roman numerals, and then come back to see how easy or difficult it is. And then, of course, algebra and so on. And there were one or two things which forced them to develop this much further. As we have noticed now when we travel, when Muslim travels, one of their biggest problem is which direction to pray. It's the first thing which hits you, right? Okay, today we have lots of Qibla finders and this, and we manage. But in those days, they had to figure it out. So astronomy was absolutely critical. The second thing you need to know is what times to pray. Again, so the movements of the sun and the planets and things had to be monitored. And this led to a discipline in mathematics and other things, which can then be developed further with knowledge from India and here and there and agglomerated. So things like the Pythagoras theorem and so on became quite easy for them and common. Now, all this meant that they became the conduits and the developers of a lot of scientific knowledge at that time. So, for example, one of the disciplines which they developed is called alchemy. Today we know it as chemistry. The problem of the time, and even today, is that time gold was the most valuable metal used for coins and so on, right? Gold was valuable because it was scarce. If it was plentiful, then it won't be so valuable because it was scarce. So now all these bright young fellows, they start to think, if we can make gold from inferior metals, we've done it, yeah? We got a factory of gold. We don't need to do anything else. So chemistry actually was developed as a blending of minerals and metals and so on, trying to make gold. But alchemy, as many of you will know, always results in failure. And we never managed to manufacture gold. But in the process, we developed chemistry, which then, of course, allowed other metals, minerals, liquids to be developed. So in this kind of ways, accumulating knowledge from the past, present, and geographical spread, Muslims became quite powerful. They were also now, with the new expansion, sitting on the main trade route between Europe and China. So what is traditionally now known as the Silk Route. Because obviously there were two things from the East which were valued. One was silk and the other one was spices. And on top of that, obviously, all the other things came. They also developed very, very expert breeding and training of horses and camels to go on these trails, and obviously to help in any battles which were needed and so on. This meant that Spain became very, very rich in knowledge because of the Muslim presence there and bringing all these materials here. Now, I think I have said this before, but let me quickly reiterate. There is a coin in the British Museum. It is called the Offa coin. It is a coin from 840 AD, found in the north of England, in Mercia. It's called the Offa coin because it was in the reign of King Offa. And so on one side of the coin is written Offa Rex. Just like on our coins today, you might see Elizabeth Rex on one side because Elizabeth the monarch. But on the other side, there is the Shahada in Arabic. 840, English king, putting the Shahada on his own coin. It's a strange thing, right? He was not Muslim. So it seems quite clearly that they must have sent people to Andalusia, south of Spain, to trade. And those traders would have said, fine, we are happy to trade with anybody. Of course, we are traders. How will you pay us? If you bring your own copper coins and trinkets and so on, what can we do with that? So they must have decided jointly to design a coin which will work from England up to China. So they developed this coin. It's quite an interesting coin with obviously particular measures of metals and so on to make sure that its weight gave its value. So you can see now the influence. Can you imagine today an English king or queen putting Shahada on the back of the coin? But that time, it was trade. You want to trade. So you can see that the prejudice or any other misconceptions were not of that nature at that time. And obviously on the basis of that, trade developed. The monopoly of the Silk Route gave the Muslims a lot of wealth to develop further all the kinds of things which you saw in Abbasic times and others in terms of really funding of arts and culture and this and that all came from this wealth. Because you have wealth, you can do many things which you can't do otherwise. So these 500 years which Muslims were in Andalusia from 711 to 1492 were probably the best period of interaction between Muslims and Christians. It was rich and it was very fertile. And in fact, when Europe wanted to discover their own heritage in Greece and Rome, they had to translate things back from Arabic into Latin. The originals they had destroyed because they had gone against knowledge and destroyed everything which they just thought this is heresy, this is bid'ah, this is this, everything was gone. And so they had got it back from there. You can see traces of some of these things in some of the materials here. For example, in the, I think it's the Pharmaceutical Society, you have the emblem of Avicenna, Ibn Sina, on top, and so on, because these were the people who developed this. So that was a situation in Spain, in the south of Spain, where this interaction was quite active and positive. So then what was the problem? And how did this change? Obviously, as the Roman and Persian Empire fell, the Andalusian empires or caliphates were not also exempt from problems. But to understand that, let us go to this other problem. As we saw yesterday, the coming of Islam and the fast spread of Islam created a very big dilemma for the Christians. Here was a message which had many, many things which were resonating with them. If you look at the different stories of the prophets, this, that, including Isa, you find that the Christians could find quite a lot which is common. They didn't have, in the story of Musa, for example, or Ibrahim, or Yaqub, or so on, they didn't find any differences between them. In fact, they found more elaboration on some of the things. And as I said, some of the expansion of Islam was facilitated by some of these people recognizing that, look, this is similar, there is no difference. But the Christians had started to build an idea, and I think after a lot of experimentation of what to call Islam, Antichrist, this, that, they came to the conclusion that this is a Christian heresy. Yani bid'ah within Christianity. It's not something new. And the Prophet Allah is an impostor. And so we need to sort of fight him. Now, the center of Christianity, in terms of spiritual center, was Jerusalem. Unfortunately for them, Jerusalem fell to the Muslims in 13 Hijri, 634, during the time of the second caliph. And then, of course, the behavior of the Muslims there towards Christians and Jews was exemplary. There was no slaughter or anything. Now, from that time, the Christians felt that there is a big challenge here. We need to take it back. And they were figuring out what to do. The Eastern Christians, and we will come between the East and West Christians soon, the Orthodox Christians, whom we know today as Orthodox Christians, could not make headway into taking Jerusalem back. So they appealed for help from the Western Christians, from the Roman Christians, and the different popes and whatever they had. So these people then now built a religious narrative that this is their equivalent of a jihad. You have to fight this jihad to defeat the Muslims, take Jerusalem back, and take other parts of the Muslim domain back. So they started to mobilize, and the first crusade, which is from 1096 to 1102, they marched and they captured Jerusalem back. So it's roughly 400 years, 450 years in Muslim hands. They took it back, and then they started. And then crusade after crusade started to come until all the, Now, remember, the crusades created most of the image of Muslims which people in the West have today. Because now, remember, for example, if a whole group or gang of knights and crusaders want to go from here, or France, or Spain, and fight in Palestine, how do they go there? How do they support themselves all the way? Because this is not now a one-day job. So they have to pillage on the road, right? They have to kill, they have to maim, they have to molest women, they have to do everything all the way through, all the time. This is how they will support themselves. In order to motivate their people, their followers, to do that, you have to brand the people you are making subservient as somehow inferior. Okay, first thing, infidels, as we say, kafirs. So, like ISIS, it's not worth. Any kafir, you can just knock them off without any problem. Women, you can take them into custody, you can molest them, you can do anything. Crops, you can destroy them, you can loot them. Cities, you can destroy and loot until you get to Jerusalem. That's the main thing. Don't worry about what we do in the middle. In fact, when they took Jerusalem back, as opposed to when Muslims took Jerusalem, the amount of bloodshed in the city was horrendous. Because their mission was to take it, not to make a nonsense of anything. So crusade after crusade in every place started to create this, but also started to build an image of Muslims in their mind, which is that these are barbarians, these are no good, you can kill them, you can murder them, you can do whatever you like, if your target is achieved. Okay? And it's persisting in some places. In fact, I remember that in 1996, I think, me and Sir Iqbal Sakrani, we from the Muslim Council of Britain, we went to see the editor of the Times. This is before 9/11 or anything, right? We went to see the editor of the Times. And we said to him, why are you writing this nonsense about Muslims? I mean, can't you be decent? He said, I know, but you know that the Crusades were not that long ago. You see what he's saying, right? That his mind is conditioned by the legacy of the Crusades. This is 1995 or 6. It's not before. So it's not something unimportant. However, crusade after crusade, they went everywhere, they looted, pillaged everything, the whole of Palestine, Egypt, North Africa, wherever the Muslims had spread. They took, and of course, Turkey, what is now Turkey, Anatolia, and so on. But as it took Muslims another 450 years, no, 110 years. Jerusalem fell to the Christians in 492, 583. Salahuddin and his army took back Jerusalem. So since then, 1187 roughly in Christian era, Jerusalem has been in Muslim hands until 1948, when the Israelis tried to take it. And still it is in disputed territory. Okay? The importance of Jerusalem for Christians is, of course, Bethlehem and the birthplace of Christ and all kinds of things. For Jews, it's the Temple of Solomon and the Wailing Wall. For Muslims, it is Masjid al-Aqsa, which, according to majority of narrations, is the place where the Prophet went on Isra, on the night journey, and he prayed there, and he went up to the heavens from the Qubbat Sakhara, which is a dome near to it. There are disputes about this, but that's the understanding of Muslims as to why it is holy. In fact, it was also, as many of you know, those of you who have been to Hajj recently, that it was also the first Qibla of the Muslims, Jerusalem. And then in the middle of one prayer, the Prophet was commanded to change 180 degrees towards Makkah. So that's the critical importance of this. So the Crusades were motivated by religious zeal on the main thing in Jerusalem, right? But in the process, these people made so many massacres and they behaved so badly that even some of their own people began to have doubts about Christianity. So there is one particular person, and I'll just come back to why it is important for us. There is Saint Francis of Assisi. He went to Egypt on a crusade. When he saw the barbarity of the Crusaders, he wanted to leave them. He did convert to Islam. But when he came back, he said to the Pope, I recommend that no Christian should ever kill any other Muslim. Because what we are doing is destroying us from inside. We may be having physical victories, but it's destroying us from inside. Other crusaders, when they went there, and you're telling them that these are savages, barbarians, and so on, see that these are cultured people having quite sophisticated technology, fabrics, and say, but how can these people manage this? So they had their own doubts that this propaganda is not good. So it was all becoming quite difficult for them. And then, okay, Salahuddin came and finished them off and told them to get lost. And then, of course, the Roman emperor became Christian. And then, of course, the Eastern Christianity, the Orthodox one, was always Christian. And Catholicism split into two, right? The other part of the story here, in terms of religious motivation for this conflict, was the campaign against the Muslims in Spain, which we know as Inquisition, or even the Reconquista, the reconquest of Spain. In fact, if you go to Granada, which is probably for tourists, is the main place they go to, the Alhambra palace. And you go down to the city, and you go to the information office. Now, I'm talking only 5 years ago, 6 years ago, maybe. There is a leaflet there which says we have a tour of how we beat the hell out of Muslims. So they take you on the tour to say where we got rid of them and what we did today. So it's not something which is simple. Anyway, they had, under King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, come together and decided that we need to reconquer this Christian land by any means necessary. So they started a campaign which was ongoing for about 100 years. First, trying to force Muslims to convert, and then trying to force them to show that they had converted. So, what was the proof you could give that you have converted? They had two tests. One was that when you come out of your house in the morning, you have to swear at the Prophet. And the second one was to eat pork. Even now, if you go to Spain, in most restaurants, you will see a pig carcass hanging there. This is the, importance of pork there, or anti-Muslim sentiment, because they know that pork is no good for Muslims. So it continued until they found that Muslims are doing all these things, but still they were practicing somehow in their homes. They were doing few things here, there, but they were teaching their children Quran in the wells, in secret places, and doing all kinds of things. So, and by the way, this was also applicable to Jews. Their hatred also was on the Jews for other reasons, which we will look at some other time. So Muslims and Jews were expelled. Those who were still Muslims, or Jews, not converted, they were expelled. They went mostly to the Maghreb, North Africa. Those who were there, they passed the test but found to be problematic. They were subject to the Inquisition, which means death. By hanging, by stretching bodies. I mean, ISIS is nothing compared to that brutality. I can show you photographs and you will just be shocked. And by 1492, they had wiped off most of the Muslims. But even today, if you go there, you will see that the architecture, the culture, everything is very much Eastern, not Western, in Spain. So again, another religious experience. This is a religious battle, again, to go against Muslims. And for that, they had to spoil the image of the Muslims and create. They burnt every book which the Muslims had translated, destroyed, and did so many things. Now look at the Muslim reaction when they went to the Maghreb with the Jews. If you go to any big city in the Maghreb, say Marrakesh or Tunis or Algiers, you will find that in all the cities there is an area called Milia, which is the Jewish quarter. They allowed them to stay in their quarter because they need certain practices. They don't go out on Sabbath and they don't do this and that. So, okay, stay nicely, comfortably, no problem. Compared there to Spain. We come to that later, but this is now the history of the Andalusia. And again, religious motivation. The third religious problem comes from the rise of the Ottomans. When the Ottomans, after the failure of the Crusades, the Ottomans started to rise and build their strength, and then they ransacked and took over what was known as Constantinople. Constantinople was the seat of Eastern Christianity, Emperor Justin. Those of you who have been to Istanbul, have you been to Hagia Sophia? Hagia Sophia was the seat of the of the Eastern Emperor, Pope, Eastern Pope. So Sinan, who was one of the leading architects of Ottoman Turkey, was commissioned to convert it into a mosque in 2 weeks because the Sultan wanted to come and lead Jummah there. And you can see that it's still, even now, it is just painted over all those Christian mosaics and so on. And he built 2 very quick minarets. So that's become Hagia Sophia, right? But then the Turks built, at the moment, if you look at a picture of Istanbul from far, you will see it is a city of mosques all over the place. Very similar design, different sizes and so on. And then they expanded towards Europe. So they came to Greece, they came to Albania, they came to Kosovo, they came to Bosnia, Macedonia, and so on, until there was fighting and they were halted somehow. But the whole of the Eastern Orthodox Christian domain came under Turkish influence. And this conflict obviously resurfaced later. Now we will see tomorrow, inshallah, Bosnia, Kosovo, Cyprus, and all these places which were taken over by these Ottomans. It surfaced again in a much more dangerous fashion than any conflict here. Because as I said yesterday, Christianity here doesn't seem to have that image of confronting Muslims per se, as Christians. In Serbia, Macedonia, Greece, there's still a lot of that sentiment that Muslims must be confronted. And so there is gradations in between these 2 extremes. And France, for example, although it pretends to be a secular country, it gets frightened by things like burkinis and whatever, right? Or pretends to get frightened. Austria, Germany, Hungary, all these people who are now talking about these issues. Okay, so that nearly gives us a picture. Okay, before that, let's see. Whilst we converted Hagia Sophia into a mosque, we didn't do anything inside which was really bad. If you compare that to the Mosque of Cordoba, which is probably one of the biggest mosques in Europe even now, what the Christians did, they put a church right in the middle of the mosque. Those of you who have gone will see. It's like a dagger in the heart of the mosque. And you cannot pray in that mosque anymore. They will not allow you. You start praying, they'll throw you out. So look at Sophia and look at this. The kind of comparative anger, hatred, whatever they have, is much more in that space than we have here. And this will, of course, determine the kind of historic relationships which will develop between the Christian and Muslim interactions in these spaces from Jerusalem to here. Now, when we come back to Jerusalem, as I said, until 1948, it was in Muslim hands. There is a history of the wars which will come to tomorrow or day after, on how this whole area of Palestine became parceled between France and Britain and all kinds of antiques and so on. But there was one thing which was common through these religious conflicts. There was an understanding, both amongst Muslims and Jews and Christians, that the three religions they had a common heritage in Ibrahim alayhi salam. So they call themselves Abrahamic faiths. And even now when you have these interfaith forums and so on, you're looking at Abrahamic faiths. Now Muslims had very little problem in accepting that good Christians or Jews will go to heaven. The Quran says so itself, that if you do good deeds and so on, you have nothing to fear. Christians have a problem because they think we are heretics. So in terms of ultimate salvation, the Jews have a different interpretation. They say, anyway, we are the chosen people, so to hell with them. Whatever happens to them is their problem. But they were never in a majority, and they are not a evangelical religion, which means the Jews do not want to spread Judaism. This is not their, you have to only be born in a Jewish family to become a Jew. Christianity and Islam are only two religions which want to actually spread across the world, which have a vision that at one point, both of us think that we will take over the world. Christians think they will take over the world. And that's why there is conflict, right? Because you want to own the whole world. The Jews have no intention of doing that. They're saying, we are the chosen people, to hell with the rest. There's no issue. As long as we are left alone, we don't bother. So this idea of Abrahamic religions at least gave some common language to the thing. Now, after the Second World War, after the establishment of Israel and so on, a European intellectual and academic discussion started. And people like Professor Bernard Lewis and so on started to say that actually we are quite different from the Muslims. Europe's heritage is Judeo-Christian. No place for Islam there. And so as soon as you say that, you are putting yourself against Islam. And say Europe should always side with that side in Palestine, in other places, not with Muslims, not with justice or anything else. This has built up until this Judeo-Christian, you will hear in politics from politicians and all kinds of people here saying that our Judeo-Christian values and heritage and so on, nothing to do with Muslims. And so the debate has shifted. And then on top, there is another issue, because we want to finish religion today. Tomorrow we want to talk something about how non-religious issues impact this relationship. There is an idea which is known as Christian Zionism. As you know, we have, for example, in our understanding that before the Mahdi comes, before Imam Mahdi alayhi salam comes, you will have the Dajjal and this and that, all kinds of predictions, and then he will come and spread justice through the earth. When he comes, Isa alayhi salam will also come and pray behind him. This is our understanding. The Christians have something similar. They also think that, some of them even say that the Mahdi will come as well, the Messiah, where Isa will come back, because for them he was resurrected after crucifixion, come back, and also the Mahdi type Messiah will come, who will slay the Antichrist, who is identified as Dajjal, will come in Jerusalem and so on. So there are parallels in this narrative. But some Christians have twisted the Christian narrative. They are saying that this Armageddon, as it is called, will only happen when Palestine is dominated fully by Jews. So when the Messiah will come, he will slaughter all the Jews. The Jews says, fine. At the moment, the emphasis is to get rid of the Muslims there so that it becomes Jewish. So we speed up the coming of the Messiah. This is Christian Zionism. I'm not saying it is Christianity, all of it. And America, this is a very strong trait. And a lot of support for Israel comes from these guys who think that the more quickly we can put all the Jews in control, the more quickly the Messiah will come and the end of time and kingdom of Jesus and whatever you have. You go and listen to their sermons and you get crazy. This is what these guys are. But it has an impact on politics. So you see people like Trump who are not Christian Zionists, but they want that constituency. They say, okay, we will give Jerusalem to Zionists. We'll give the West Bank to Zionists. We will do this, and we're signing. Is it his to give? But that dimension is transforming the whole idea of how the three religions coexist in that space, and also poisoning European and American attitudes as to how this relationship will develop. Okay? So what we have seen today is that the religious conflict between Muslims and Europe is symbolized by the Crusades, by the Inquisition, and of course Reconquista, by the Turkish advance in Eastern Europe, most what we call Eastern Europe, the Balkans and the Eastern Europe, and finally the changing of the narrative to Judeo-Christian. So the West is Judeo-Christian, not Muslim, never was. Forget what they brought or didn't bring. And we are separate from them. So we need to build that narrative. So inshallah, and let us remember also that most of these developments are limited to the Catholic tradition within Christianity. The Protestant and evangelical tradition has got a different trait. And tomorrow we will see that how that transformed into plunder and colonialism through missionaries and otherwise. Yeah, but that's a different relationship which also has a bearing on what is happening today. So, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Thank you very much. We have some time for some questions. So are there any questions on either side?
I just want to understand when the Ottomans took over again, as far as their beliefs and feelings towards Ahlul Bayt were concerned, because in Hagia Sophia I was quite surprised to see, besides the name of Allah and the first four Khalifs, Hassan and Hussein were also mentioned. So I was just wondering, this is within Hagia Sophia, the plaques on the walls.
So we will probably come to that in the last lecture, but you will find this subtlety in places where there is Ottoman influence. This stems from a slightly more nuanced understanding of the place of Ahlul Bayt. You will also find in Turkey, in many Sunni places, they have Saifa Sajjadiyah and things of Imam Zain al-Abidin and so on. So there is a little bit different, although in a lot of its history, it has been very hardline Hanafi. But there is this different trait. It is possible to accommodate that within the Hanafi tradition without any problem. The second thing is that a lot of the Turkish tradition is influenced by Sufism. So, you know, the famous poet Jalaluddin Rumi and so on were in Konya, Turkish Persian, Turkish, and so on. And that has also most of the Sufi orders trace their origin to Imam Ali alayhi salam. Is their what they call their kutub, their pole. Except one big Sufi order which is called the Naqshbandiya, which traced their pole to the first Caliph Abu Bakr. Right? All the others, everybody else to that. So that naturally brings you into a little bit more sympathy with the Ahlul Bayt because you're coming from that line. So you're right. You won't see this in Pakistan, for example, in Sunni mosques, the name of Imam Hassan or Hussein. But Turkey, yes, you will see in many mosques.
Do we have any more questions from either side?
Yeah.
Thank you. The Jews think Isa alayhi salam was a heretic and a fake, and Christians are heretics. And the Christians think the Jews got the Romans to crucify Jesus. So I still don't understand why they like each other, and I genuinely don't understand why they seem to work so well together.
You're quite right. Of course, obviously, as you may know, Isa alayhi salam was born as a Jew. He was probably, in all accounts, a rabbi. And early Christians used to actually worship in synagogues in that area, right? Only when the Jews found that their practice was devious, then they started to throw them out and so on. The Christians, on the other hand, as you rightly said, and it's not only on that occasion, on many other occasions when the Muslims came back to take Jerusalem and so on, the Christians labeled them as traitors, that you are assisting the enemy to defeat us and so on. So there is an acrimony between them. But as I said, recently that acrimony has been put to one side. Even the Pope, not this one, the two before, has issued a kind of encyclical saying that we don't have any enmity with the Jews and so on. So they have sort of tried to revise their doctrine a little bit more. But yeah, originally it is quite antagonistic.
Any more questions? Time for
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. When Salahuddin took over Jerusalem from the Christian and the Crusader, he didn't do us any favors. He did exactly what the Crusader did when they took Jerusalem from the Muslims. Is that not the case?
Well, he made a mess in Fatimid Egypt before he went there, right? Which has a problem for us. But as far as the Christians were concerned, Muslims took over Jerusalem, right? They don't bother whether it is anti-Fatimid or this or that. So we're looking at from that angle. Yeah, when we sometimes come and look at Salahuddin and his history, we might explore these issues. But for the Christians, it doesn't have much meaning. They didn't have that nuance.
Assalamu alaikum. So this Jewish idea of only they will go to heaven and no one else can, it's somehow leaked into Islam as well. Is it something that's
Linked into Islam?
it's kind of leaked into
Leaked.
Islam,
Okay.
or even Shiism, or just a general leak, basically?
Yeah.
Is it something that is not actually leaked and it's something that is there from tradition, or is it a more defensive political?
It's not tradition, it's Quranic. There are a few ayahs in the Quran talking about the Ahlul Bayt, and says, say to the Ahlul Bayt that if you do good deeds and believe sincerely, you have Ahlul Kitab, sorry. I'm sorry, Ahlul Kitab. You have nothing to fear, which means salvation is possible for you. So it's not leaked. The question comes when you go outside the Ahlul Kitab, okay? Outside the Jews and Christians. So somehow in early Islam, the Zoroastrians have been included. And then there have been attempts through history. So for example, the Mughal Emperor Akbar, he started to put forward this idea that we know only 25 prophets, all in the Middle East. And we are saying that we had 124,000 prophets. So what happened to this? And what message did they bring? Did they bring any book or not? So technically we could consider many of them as Ahlul Kitab and therefore open to salvation, right? So it's a very vague tradition, but no, it has not leaked, it is explicitly there. And that has stopped Muslims from massacring Christians on many occasions because they have offered a very, very good model to them.
So then is it more of a modern idea where you have specific sect in Islam which will say, no, if everyone else doesn't follow this way, then, you know, like...
I don't think it's modern. I think it's, you know, you always have these extremes coming up. So the argument is that these Christians are not the same as those Christians. Their practice is completely deviated and therefore not. But if you look at the discussion before Mubahila, you see that the question is exactly the same. There is no difference in the question. If after that the Quran says you're still open to salvation, then really it's difficult.
There's time for one final question, if there are any more.
You've explained beautifully how they've poisoned the world about Islam, whether from Christianity or Judaism. What is being done to counteract that poison from the Muslims' world in current life, in current time? And who do you think is doing it?
So, not much, but this is the subject of the fifth discussion as to what we should be doing about this, right? First, we want to see that a lot of this discourse has moved even beyond religion. So it's not only informed by religion here. There are other issues, so we need to see what are these issues, then we see how to address them. Religion is an issue, of course. There are politicians, for example, in Holland, who say that the Quran should be banned. These Wilders. Okay, there are right-wing fellows here who say the Quran should be banned. I mean, the UKIP, leader of UKIP, says the Quran should be banned. So yes, it is there, but it's not the dominant policy-making front at the moment. It was in the time of the Crusades or Inquisition and so on. And it is in Serbia and other places. But here, not yet. So we will bring all those together in the last session, inshallah. So before we finish, Maria, I just want to expand on this Francis of Assisi thing. The current Pope, when he, you know, when a Pope is appointed, they take on a sort of nickname. His name is not Francis. So he said to the assembly, he said, man, look, I am choosing the name Francis for myself. And there is a reason for it. It's just not a random choice. I like to remind you of the words of St. Francis of Assisi that do not fight Muslims if you are going to do it brutally. Our mission in this time is to live peacefully with Muslims. So it's a very, and obviously he comes from South America, so that's a different, no European Pope will say that, I can tell you. No. No. It's like 300-400 years ago. And he was also one of the guys, although he was a Jesuit, which we will see some other time, he was also champion of liberation theology, which is that theology can help you to liberate from American colonialism.
Okay, thank you very much. Can we have a salawat, please?